Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, welcome.
How are you, good sir?
You know, I am very sick right now. I got some daycare schmutz from
those kids.
The children. Now that school in the United States is back in session, we are getting the germs in daycare.
Mm-hmm.
And I am very miserable. Like last night, you texted me like, hey, you want to prep? And I was like, actually, I'm asleep. So.
Yep.
I am extremely sick right now. And we're kind of on the, when you start to get sick, and it's just getting worse.
Yes.
I'm on that part.
Oh, that's too bad.
So if you hear me like hack or you hear my voice start to crack, that's why.
Yep. That's okay. Well, hopefully you got some rest and you'll continue to get some rest today.
Mm-hmm. I spent some money. I got a new walking pad treadmill.
Oh, okay.
Which is great.
Tell me about this.
I went on Wirecutter and I was like, oh, well, I want to put more walking in. And it's kind of been like heinously hot, unseasonably hot in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to walk in the heat. So I diva'd and bought a walking pad treadmill. And then I immediately put 20K steps down. And don't do that because it hurts. If you just go from 0 to 20K, that hurts a lot. So don't do that.
So this goes under your desk while you work?
Yeah, it's got little wheels on it so you can kind of roll it around if you want.
Okay.
It was kind of a bear to set up. Like I was dripping sweat setting it up because it's heavy. Even for a walking pad thing, it's heavy.
So it's on wheels, but mostly it will stay in one place.
Yeah. You're not going anywhere with it. But I have it upstairs where we have our lift desk, so I can like work standing up.
Okay.
If I want to.
Cool.
Which I do sometimes. And the first day I got it, I maybe overdid it. So, yeah. And then I'm also working with an artist for my game, and I got my first sketches back from them. And
Concept art.
The vibes are great. So
awesome.
We're going to be iterating on that. And
I want to see them.
Here,
you didn't even send them to me.
I didn't send them to you yet. Here, I'll send them to you after the show. But
nice.
They're great. I have only a couple notes, but I think it's basically right on what I was thinking. So it's great.
Awesome. That's very exciting.
Yeah. And then I had all my hairs cut, every single one of them.
Got a nice haircut. I did too. Yeah, about a week ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, I got my haircut. Yeah, I like to get my haircut before I do recording and stuff, and I have some courses that I'll be working on this month. So,
yeah, I gotta do something about the front half of me.
I was camping this weekend.
Yeah, how did that go?
It was a lot of fun.
It was hot.
It was actually not too bad where we were because we were up north, not quite in Duluth, but more to the west, at a state park. And at night, it was like 60 some. So it was like pretty much perfect. It was like maybe 56 or something like that. So it was a little cool, but kind of just perfect. And then during the day, it was like 75. And actually in Duluth, when we went, it was like 66.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't too hot up there. So it was really nice.
Yeah, the lake helps with that.
Yep. Yes, exactly. And it was super foggy. I've never seen that much fog before, but it was incredibly dense fog as we were driving into Duluth. And then it cleared up by the late afternoon. But we did 2 nights. So we were putting up the tent with the van headlights on so that I could see. So I was able to put up both tents, and we got everyone into bed the night that we arrived. And sleep was pretty good, not too bad. One of the best things that we got recently was these camp cots that kind of elevate you off the ground and provide a way more comfortable sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't sleep on those like little thermarest things.
No.
They don't really work that great.
Nope. We tried that the first time that we went camping with the kids. And then I think I mentioned this before, but the last time we went camping, it was all 5 of us in a 6-person tent. And by the way, always subtract 2 from whatever the tent says, how many people. So
I feel like tents are measured like hot dogs. Like
yes.
This is technically a 4-person tent if they were hot dogs.
Yep, exactly. So that just, it worked, but it was like stepping over people. Like the cots were literally, there was no room in between. It was like pushing out the sides of the tent. But so I got a second tent for the kids, and that was a great decision.
Mm-hmm.
And they really liked it too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, they can wrestle in their own tent.
Exactly. So we had the youngest in ours, and then the older 2 in the other tent, and that worked out great. So highly recommend just having multiple tents if you have kids.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we get on to the news for the week of September 8th, 2025?
Yeah.
Welcome to WW TypeScript Wrestling.
WWT.
In this corner, we have TSGo. There's actually been a couple cool updates to TSGo. First of all, Anders added full JSDoc support in the LSP. So you can go take a look at the PR if you want to. It's 1702. But that includes find all references, go to definition, everything, full JSDoc support. And then we talked a little bit about this, that the TypeScript build watch mode was going to be the performance greatly improved, but now that's fully merged. So this ports the TSC-B-W, the build watch mode functionality, to TSGo. And I think this PR, it's number 1684. It's massive. It's like 33,000 lines or something crazy. So really, really big feature. And then if you've been on the fence or have tested TSGo and you're using JSX and React, I think there was a couple edge cases. One was HTML entities, I think, weren't being transformed correctly, and those fixes are in now. So better compatibility with JSX for React. Next up, what you got?
All right, next we have a big one. Deno 2.5 dropped with a lot of goodies.
Sweet.
The first one that I want to highlight is permission sets in the Deno.json. This adds a lot of like quality of life improvements for specifying permissions. You can create an alias for permissions. So you can be like, hey, I want to create an alias for process data, which is like I can read and write to a directory specifically. So I want to give this TypeScript file like a synthesized permission that I'm going to call process data, and they have a blog post about that, and it's pretty cool. The next one that I wanted to highlight is the Deno test setup and teardown APIs. They've added new APIs to Deno test, and they have like before all, before each, after all, after each. This is kind of like, if you're familiar with Mocha or
Jasmine,
this is kind of like your
yeah.
bog standard stuff. Now this is just kind of like built in, which is nice. They've reintroduced the Deno bundle, which we talked about a little bit, but now they have a programmatic API, so you can do Deno bundling in Deno with Deno code, which is pretty neat.
Plus, they also added HTML entry point support. So before, you could only give it like a script entry point, but now you can give it an HTML file. So this is a lot more similar to like Vite and Parcel, where if you're referencing any scripts or you're referencing any styles, those will just get referenced in the bundled HTML. So this is just like really nice, out of the box, zero config. And so one of the questions that they address is like, well, how is this different now from like Vite? And they said basically you can use Deno bundle for pretty simple static sites. But if you need something any more complex than that, then you could, use Vite.
Yeah. And in their documentation, they talk about it's built on top of VS Build. So that's probably why it overlaps so much with Vite. And in the current, MO, they overlap quite a bit, but that'll be changing as Vite moves towards roll down as their way of doing bundling. So I imagine there's a possibility of divergence there, but like in the current modus, very similar.
They improved the output of Deno install, so it's formatted a lot nicer. They have like a screenshot of kind of what it looks like now, and it like lists your direct dependencies and versions and stuff after you do an install. So that's pretty nice.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's nice. And they even tell you like where it came from. They're like, oh, this is a JSR, this is an npm. But that looks so nice.
Yeah. Speaking of JSR and npm and different ways to import stuff in Deno, you may be familiar with the fact that you don't need a Deno.json or a package.json to add dependencies. You can basically just import directly using the prefixes in a script file, which is awesome for like really quick prototyping and scripts, but is not so great when you have a production app and your developers are like, I'm just going to import this random dependency that's not going to have a version, and it's going to just, we don't have any record of it. So anyway, they added some new lint rules to prevent these. So the first one is no unversioned import, so that if you try to import something directly from JSR and you don't put a version, it will produce a lint error. So that you do have to pin a version, which is really nice, and that's enabled by default now. And then the no import prefix rule is enabled when there is a package or a Deno.json file present. And this is so that you can prevent your production app from sneaking in dependencies. So yeah, I definitely like both of these because that was kind of a confusing thing when I was starting to learn Deno, was like, why are there two ways for me to add dependencies? I don't really like how I can just like accidentally add a dependency randomly to my app. So these, I think, remove some foot guns that people on big teams would probably appreciate.
Yeah. Next, we have the unstable node globals API, and it's bringing back the node style set timeout and set interval, which for my game server peeps is probably good news. So this is a subtle change. So right now, Deno has always used kind of the web version of these APIs, and that returned like a timer ID. But in the Node.js APIs, they return and accept a timer object. So you can more fine-grained configure and mess with these timers.
Yep. And these are like set interval, clear interval, set timeout, clear timeout.
That's right.
And notably, this is actually going to be the default behavior in Deno 3 because it is a breaking change. They're going to switch to the node style timer APIs because I think that they just found that there's a little bit too many inconsistencies with other packages in the ecosystem that are kind of relying on that return value being a timer object for server APIs.
That's right. And when you're in a server API context, oftentimes you want a little more control that would be inappropriate in like a browser context.
Cool. They added some tsconfig improvements. Now, we covered Deno 2.4, but I think that we missed the fact that they added out-of-the-box Vite type checking support. So if you configured a Deno project with Vite and then you ran Deno check, you had to do a bunch of like workarounds to get it to work. And in 2.4, they made that just work out of the box. And now in 2.5, they added additional compatibility specifically for SvelteKit when you do like a SvelteKit create command to create a new app. And then the Next.js create next app. Those are just going to work now out of the box because they added support for root-ders, tsconfig, and the bundler option for the module resolution. So that's pretty nice. So get some more compatibility.
There's also been some performance improvements. Deno has ratcheted up the performance. They added emit cache optimization. So this is avoiding underlying recompilation by more intelligently knowing when the Deno AST changes under the hood. So rather, on every update, it'll figure out when it actually needs to run. They've updated the CommonJS wrapper. So if you're using CommonJS in your code, what they've done is they've reduced some of the memory and heap allocations. So whenever you have reduction in allocation, it actually also affects CPU performance. So that's always good. Conditional JSX transpilation, which is great if you don't use JSX because it just doesn't do it. So that's excellent. The structured clone API, I think we talked about this a little bit. There was some updates inside of Chromium that are now available here. And then there's also, I think they'd made some additional improvements as well based on how Deno operates. So there's like, you get the Chromium structured clone improvements, and then also some of the Deno engineering that improved it further inside of the Deno runtime.
Yes. And finally, Eric, you'll be happy to hear that the unstable temporal flag is getting closer to being unflagged. Because did you know that the V8 14.0 release included a lot of implementation work for temporal API?
I didn't know that, but that makes me happy because it's also been like Fusion. Like, when did we have temporal?
Uh-huh. So they said that you still have to have the flag, but it is inching closer, and we're getting there.
Nice.
Yeah.
And kind of a fun side note is Deno Fresh is now officially at 2.0,
Yep.
literally the day we were recording the last
Mm-hmm.
episode.
Yep. Out of beta now.
They're out of beta. So I thank you to Fry69 who replied to our post, and they're like, hey, did you know it just happened? I was like, oh, it did.
Love it.
And nothing changed there. It's now ready to go.
Excellent. Okay, rspack. There's been a minor release, 1.5.3. Normally we don't cover every single minor release, but this one is pretty cool. They added advanced tree shaking for dynamic imports. So when you do like a wait import, my module, that's a dynamic import. And what it'll do is it'll statically analyze what members you're trying to access off the module, and it'll tree shake everything else. So I think that there are cases where if it can't decide what is statically analyzable, then it won't do tree shaking, but in a lot of cases it will. So this is a really big improvement for bundling and minification and stuff.
Yeah. Not only did rspack get this changed, but webpack got it too, which is pretty awesome.
Yep. So the whole ecosystem is better off.
That's right.
Cool. Hey, you remember last time we just talked about this big npm supply chain attack?
Yes.
And you brought up this idea, well, Joshua Goldberg and a few other people have mentioned this idea of like a cooldown period.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? pnpm 10.16 release adds a minimum release age config to help mitigate these supply chain attacks. So basically this is like your cooldown period, but it's in terms of like running the pnpm install command. So you can set it in your pnpm config, and across your whole team, if someone tries to run install or tries to update something, it will throw an error or it'll just ignore it if the release has not passed the minimum release age.
Nice. And we talked about in the last show, this does protect you on the new release, but it also comes with the trade-off of what if there's a 0 day and you want the update.
It actually allows you to add a minimum release age exclude property where you can list any packages that you want to exclude from a minimum release. So like webpack or like some well-known package that you
trust.
That you trust. Yep. You can add it to the exclude config and you'll get the new version right away, which, is going to have a trade-off because if one of those packages that you put in the exclude has a supply chain attack, then it doesn't protect you. But I think this is just kind of a nice kind of like end user mitigation for this. Like obviously there's still it's a systemic problem that we need to fix, but this gets us a little closer to making our supply chain more secure.
All right, we're moving on to community highlights.
Yeah. We've got Dr. Axel's Corner, still on a tear, going through learning web development. This time there are 2 posts implementing web servers, which is pretty cool if you want to learn how to sort of implement a web server from scratch. And then the other one is authenticating users with plain Node.js. So this is pretty sweet. I feel like he's getting further up the chain in terms of like, here's some cool stuff that we can do, where I'm starting to be like, I actually might read this because I don't remember how to do you remember how do you authenticate users with just plain Node.js, no authentication framework, no nothing, right? So it's kind of cool to learn some of the fundamentals again.
All right, moving up, there's a great article about lessons from npm security failures by Nawaz Dandala. I am so sorry if I got that wrong. Based out of the UK, and they go through kind of a bulleted list of kind of the big problems. Like 1, anyone can publish, updates are instant, dependencies nest infinitely, making an attack surface that you'll never see, and maintainer accounts are a single point of failure, as we saw last week. And they have a couple of ideas for solutions, which I think are pretty interesting. 1, enforcing mandatory package signing, adding multi-maintainer approval for popular packages. So, nuclear code, you got to turn at least 2 keys before you can publish something. Phish resistant authentication. We were talking a little bit about passkeys, I think, last week, looking at like hardware security keys. So that would be like your YubiKey, like you have like a hardware that you have to plug into your computer in order to auth, stuff like that. Automated malware detection. Arguably, this is a thing that should be there. I feel like anytime you see something like obfuscated code in there, like you're like, that seems fishy at the least, because normal human library authors don't need to do that, except for maybe I could maybe see some extenuating circumstances for like proprietary code, for example, but still kind of fishy in that case as well.
Yep.
But there's certain also behaviors that most software doesn't need to do, which is crypto or like file system, like credential harvesting or reading environment variables. Having build attestation is another possible fix. Providence attestation. This also relies on, CI/CD platforms, providing those guarantees. So, you need to, like, for example, you need to build on GitHub Actions to get npm provenance right now, which could be required, but, you get like a monopoly problem there. Only certain CIs can provide provenance guarantees about the source code. Like the source that was in the repository is the one that got built and packaged.
Right.
So that doesn't necessarily protect you, because like if someone gets a hold of your GitHub credentials, or they they can sneak a PR in, there's still an attack vector there.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about the ghost action issue last week, so that was similar, where like you can sneak a commit in there that changes your workflow, and then it's still building it. It's still coming from your source code, but now you've built in the malware that gets published, and it's still verified.
Yeah, and the last thing that he mentions is dependency sandboxing, which is a feature I wish Deno had, where you could say like, hey, this package can only can't read the file system. Like that would be awesome. Or on a per file basis, that would be awesome. But that's not, as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe Deno can do that on a per package basis, but my understanding is that it can't. It's like a whole process permission.
I believe so. And obviously someone will correct us if I'm wrong, but I think I remember that when we talked about this a while ago, it was several months ago, I think, when we discussed Deno's permissions, that doing like per module based security or per package based security is really, really hard to do. It's like a really hard problem.
Yep.
Yeah. By the way, on that topic of trusted publishing and provenance and attestation, I heard, or I saw, that NuGet for .NET developers, the NuGet package feed is adding trusted publishing. So it seems like these package providers are getting the memo of like, we need to like do something from the ground up. Like we need to rethink how the security works. Now, one thing to note is that JSR has a lot of these things in here because it was designed with like a security first mindset. So like it's got an OAuth flow for publishing. It's got the provenance from GitHub Actions. And I believe it also has malware analysis. I think so, but I guess don't quote me on that. But I thought that I saw it can do like scanning of your packages when it gets uploaded. But anyway, so I think JSR is kind of on a good security footing here. Maybe npm will follow suit.
Yeah. Arguably, npm has become somewhat stagnant, and there's a whole cottage industry of tools and providers to kind of fill the gap that maybe npm should be filling.
Yeah, which is silly because it's a commercial entity. So get your act together, npm / Microsoft.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the end of the chain on that one.
All right. Hey, we've talked multiple times now on several episodes, talking to even multiple open source developers about how hard it is to write a TypeScript editor, like a editor that works in your web browser that supports TypeScript types and stuff. And usually it's like a hacked version of Monaco is kind of what people are doing. But Valtown just open sourced their TypeScript editor, and there's not like a whole ton of it's not like a fully open source thing with lots of documentation and stuff, but they rewrote it from scratch. It's really fast, and they're using it themselves, and they open sourced it. It's called VTLSP, but you should go read the blog post because it goes into some of the engineering details. And I don't know if this is a fork of Monaco or if they just rewrote it from scratch with something else. But anyway, this topic of like TypeScript editors has come up quite a bit. And so this seems like a really nice resource. So thanks a ton to Valtown for open sourcing this. Maybe we can see some innovation now for some of these TypeScript editors.
Yeah, some of the innovation here that they bring along is it allows you to run the LSP for your particular language. In this case, they wanted to add the Deno LSP into their editor because Valtown runs server-side little like code snippets, if you're not familiar. This makes it really fast because you don't need to load a whole like LSP server in like a web worker. You can just have this code living and running somewhere in like a Cloudflare container, and Valtown just has to render the UX.
Yeah, so I think that there's like an infrastructure component to this, like to run this one, right? Because I would need to deploy that LSP to like a Cloudflare worker, my own, so that the editor can talk to it, right?
Yeah, let me see. It looks like this is the case, but I could be wrong. They might have a way for you to not run like an LSP remotely. But in any case, this is great because this brings more like web editor competition to the space that's open source.
Yeah, so next time I look at the Excalibur docs or our playground, this is something that I might take a look at. So see if we can integrate it or if it'll help or something.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Next up, Josh Goldberg had a post on Blue Sky that I think you might be interested in. And this is a tracker of all of the common features and linting rules across all of the linters out there. And there's a lot of competition in this space. So like if you're like, I want to move from this to this might be useful. Or it might be like, oh, what are the differentiating rules in this linter over this linter? You could go take a look at their Google spreadsheet, which is not the definitive source, but maybe like a first step, like a first stab. So you can compare like, oh, what are all the rules? What's the overlap between them? I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, this is super cool. Does he mark like which ones are type aware versus not?
Ooh, let's look. Let me pull up in this Google spreadsheet.
Pulling it up now.
You know what's really cool is it has like a name translation. So this is what the rule is called in this thing versus this thing.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah, some of it, let's see. He's put a lot of work into this. This is great. Thanks, Josh, for being our linting consultant. Now, this is what consultants do, buddy. So thank you for this. This is great.
Per rule charge?
But like, seriously, this is like, I want to know like what the landscape is. So this is super cool. There is like under the Flint plugin column, it does say one's related to TypeScript. So maybe that's how you can figure out if ones are type aware or not. But anyway, this is pretty sweet. Now, one thing just to reiterate is that there's a big notice at the top that says this is not a definitive source of truth. So don't read too heavily into it. But this is still really useful, I think.
Yeah, this is pretty neat, especially looking at like where Flint is going to be going with this, deliberately implementing or not implementing specific rules. You can kind of get an idea of where Flint is going.
Yep, exactly. Sweet. Well, thank you, Josh, for that resource. Next up, I saw on Reddit a pretty cool discussion that was one of the top rated threads this last week. It is name underrated things in TypeScript. So there's a few things that floated to the top in the comments, and most of these we've covered already, but assert functions. So this is like assert is not undefined. You know, you can write your own assert functions. And then in a similar vein, type guards, which check the type coming in and the return type is narrowed to what you want it to be, and that can help you guard and narrow the type in conditionals and stuff like that. Now, this one I haven't really used too much myself, but you have used it, which is the as const plus satisfies combination. So do you want to maybe just give an example of, like, they talk about mocking. It's pretty useful for mocking, but like I think you mentioned before that you've used it for configs too.
Yeah, so especially the as const. So like as const is basically saying, hey, TypeScript, these things will never change. These are all constants. So that's not a feature of JavaScript because everything is mutable. As const signals to the type system that hey, this won't change, which is super useful if you have config. Otherwise, the type hints can't really help you for like nested, like, JSON-ish config. Like you'll just get like, hey, it could be any kind of string on this object. But if you use as const, you'll get like, hey, config.night.health equals, some number. For example, is one thing we do a lot in video game config is we have our different units like just in a flat file, TypeScript file with string keys. But if you have as const on them, then you get like type hinting on them. Versus like if you didn't do that, you could, typo night and miss that on that silent K. And oops.
That's right. What about the satisfies keyword?
This is useful when you want to check that something matches some type, but you also want to keep the more specific type for like inference purposes. So like, especially like in an as const situation, you want to keep the very specific type because it's very specific. But you might want to be like, oh, well, I want to make sure that it satisfies this record shape, like maybe this more general shape. I want to make sure it satisfies like a more general interface. That's where it's super useful.
Yeah. So the original poster says that this has boosted our mocking and tests significantly. So we no longer use the exclamation mark, like the dot exclamation mark, like this, trust me, bro, this exists, or the null coalescing operator, or the as keyword in our tests, because now we can use satisfies. So it has cleaned up a lot of their mocking. So that's pretty sweet. Cool. Yeah, that's a nice use case. And then finally, another person chimed in and said discriminated unions, which I would agree with.
Yeah, no, I use these a ton.
And then there's one other gem, but I'm going to save it for the secret of the handbook segment in a little bit. Yeah. All right. We got a couple tool and library watches. So this one I saw on Hacker News. It's called confkit. That's CONFKIT .dev. Imagine, if you would, dear listener, that you have config and secrets, and you want them to be consistent, and you want them to be type safe, and you don't want them to be spaghetti code all over your different environments across different files. So confkit helps you do that. It's type safe config and schemas that work across all runtimes. You define your schema once in a TypeScript file, and you can then import it and use it across your whole app. And this includes like you can layer in configuration from environment, like environment variables, files, and actual secret, like a secret store. And so it has a built-in secret store. It can redact secrets. So this is pretty cool. This is like something that is kind of annoying. Like if you've got a full stack app and you want type safe config, I would be looking at this for sure. Next up, Library Watch for a TypeScript-first HTTP framework. It's called Taxum, TAXUM.js.org. It is brand new, fresh bits. And I saw this on Blue Sky from user Dasprid. And they said, hey, I'm really excited to announce this new HTTP framework. And so I said, that's awesome. What is kind of your like elevator pitch? Because what came to mind immediately was like, why not use Express or something like that? And they said, well, this has better overall type safety at every step. It has cleaner error handling. It has separation of input validation and business logic. It's also much easier to test, and it has built-in request flow tracing. So in general, they said it has a better developer experience. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd be taking a look at that. Okay, last library watch. This one is called Conformal. It is a type-safe FormData and submissions library, and it implements standard schema. So standard schema, if you remember, is like Valibot, Archetype, Zod. All the creators have come together and said, this is kind of the base schema that we support for validation. And so you can kind of mix and match. You use whatever validator library you want, and you can kind of plug and play with the standard schema. So Conformal supports, you can bring your own schema validator. And some of the cool things, like, first of all, type-safe form data is huge. I really, really like that. But it also preserves the raw form inputs and the error messages, so you can do validation messages or operate on like the raw inputs if you need to. So this is pretty cool. So again, that's by Markham user, GitHub username /conformal. So you can go check that out.
All right. The last thing I've got is why using bun in production maybe isn't the best idea.
Oh, spicy.
I am very sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your name, so I'm not going to try. But we'll link to the article here on Dev2. But they have a lot of interesting points that I think I've made in the past, but I think this is a very interesting read. I think this is just maybe, I don't think this is a definitive don't use it, but I think this is a thing to think about if you're going to deploy new technology into your stack. So I think it's definitely something to think about. They make some good observations that I think could be also applied to Deno and other runtimes that maybe don't have the same history as like Node, for example. But some like key highlights where I think there are maybe some good points is that one, there's kind of this be everything or be sustainable. And Bun kind of has the be everything
mantra.
Yeah. So they're doing a lot of stuff, which, maybe you want to be focused on something and do that really well, or because I think it's hard to do everything really well. And then the other ones that I think I also agree with is the binary lock file is kind of suspect because of, for example, the recent supply chain attacks. Like that's a sneaky way to get malicious code through. That's a little iffy to me.
That would make it hard to diff too, right?
That's right. Yeah. It'd basically make it impossible, right? That you'd have to be like, well, I'm either taking yours or mine. And I think one good thing to read here is kind of the conclusion of the article is like, when should you use Bun? And I think we've also said this before. It's good fits, prototypes, playgrounds where the integrated DX speeds you up. I agree. Single purpose CLI or scripts where portability isn't critical. Projects where you need performance above anything else and you're willing to sacrifice potentially stability. I think things to think about here that they add is stick to standards, like instead of Bun specifics. And if you do leverage Bun specifics, like isolate those, don't like pepper them throughout your code. Standard practice in software engineering. Prefer portable tooling, pin your versions, all bog standard advice. I think these are things to think about. And I recommend anyone read this. And this is not me trying to dissuade you, but I think it's just something to think about when you're looking at a new player. And this also applies to Deno. So I'm not trying to pick on Bun.
Yep. No, it makes sense. I mean, like any of these runtimes, from the perspective of a business, like a company, you are in the mode of risk reduction, right? Like anytime you're evaluating vendors to use or technology to use or whatever, you're like trying to figure out what's the best tool for the job that is also the least risky to adopt, right? And I mean, Node.js is just gonna beat out everything, right? Because you've got so many. It's just been battle tested enough where if you want to adopt something like Deno or Bun for a production workload, it's going to come down more to the specific job that it excels at. And then the question is it better than using Node for that specific job? If the answer is no, we're just going to go with Node, right? Because that's going to be easier. It's going to be easier to find developers who have worked with it. It's just, more community support, all that type of stuff. But if you've got a very specific job that Bun or Deno is going to really excel at, then that needs to outweigh the risk of adopting something that is maybe a little bit less battle tested. So I think that's the perspective that you'll see in most enterprises that I've dealt with and on my teams that I've worked on. I don't know if you feel the same.
Definitely. Yeah. I think,
so it's not to pick on any of the runtimes. It's just sort of the nature of how this works.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a big part of big software is like, oh, well, we need to understand what the long-term support and longevity of the company behind it. In this case, Node doesn't have one, which is like a plus and a minus, but they are well established in the industry. So check in that column.
Cool. Hey, should we talk about a secret of the handbook?
Yeah. You teased a secret here.
I did. Yeah. So this was actually from the Reddit thread, but I had not known about this. So you might be already familiar, so it might not be a secret, that there is a generate trace flag that you can pass to TSC. So that generates a file for diagnostics and debugging. Okay. But did you know that Microsoft also provides a tool called TypeScript Analyze Trace? And it says here that this is a tool for analyzing the output of TSC generate trace in a fast and digestible way, rather than involving more diagnostics. And that the goal is to identify clear-cut hotspots and provide enough context to extract a small reproduction. The reproduction can then be used as the basis of a bug report or a starting point for manual code inspection or profiling. So this was something in the Reddit commenting thread that someone said is pretty amazing for really big code bases or big projects. So I thought this was really cool. I did not know about this.
Yeah, this actually might be super useful if you have like your type checking is taking too long. You can take a look and see like what is happening here.
Yeah, talking about optimizing TypeScript type performance and stuff. This is a pretty cool tool for doing that.
All right. I got some cool links. I actually just have one because it was a busy week this last week and I'm sick. But I have been watching old like Game Boy and game system restorations on YouTube. And the quality of these videos is stupendous, but also they don't say a word. It's just complete silence with like captions about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you just hear the sounds of them working on an old rusted Game Boy. It's stupendous.
Bob Ross Game Boy restorations.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I fell asleep to watching some Game Boy restoration last night. It was awesome. Like, and also I'm pretty impressed with like what they do to like make these rusted components look nice again. They like replate them in nickel and stuff. It's very cool.
Wow. That's some dedication.
Yeah.
I think that the coolest thing I guess I ever did with sort of the Game Boy restoration type stuff is when I was dating my wife. She had a Nintendo DS and the screen cracked. And so I ordered a new screen from some third-party marketplace or whatever, and I installed it, and I put it in, and it worked, and I thought that was super cool.
I have my original silver DS here on my desktop with my favorite game in it.
Yep. Speaking of games, my cool link is more of a cool game. Some people may know. I already finished Jedi Survivor. Fantastic game. 10 out of 10. Going on one of my all-time favorites. Is a fantastic game. And another fantastic game, but it came out long time ago, was the original Assassin's Creed, like the very first one. It was sort of like, I've never seen anything like it before. It was like totally, like, that was when sort of open world sandbox games were kind of becoming a thing. And that was always one of my favorites. But kind of looking back on it, you know, there's a lot of quality of life things that are missing now that you can get from the modern Assassin's Creeds. So I was excited when they announced Assassin's Creed Mirage because it kind of goes back to that similar time period, similar setting. It's set in Baghdad and it follows one of the assassins, Basim. And they did a fantastic job on it. So I'm playing that right now. And that's available on Xbox Game Pass. So I was waiting on it because it wasn't available on Game Pass right away. Now it is. So you can play it.
Fun.
But yeah, I mean, I think what I like a lot about it is they did a good job with the kind of cultural stuff with it because it's set in ancient Baghdad. And so they work in a lot of Arabic script to it. NPCs will be like talking in Arabic, which I thought was pretty cool. And all the Islamic references that they have are accurate and are not, they like actually use voice actors who can speak Arabic and stuff, which, because one of the funniest things about the original Assassin's Creed is like you're playing this guy, Altair, who's like supposed to be Arabic, is like a California voice, you know, is like a California voice actor with like a perfect California voice, you know, accent and stuff. So there's no Arabic accents at all, basically, in the original Assassin's Creed. But this one does. And so I was really happy about that. So anyway, I thought their accuracy was really good. And it's also really fun to play. Kind of gets back to the basics of like sneaking around and doing assassinations and stuff. Like you have to be sneaky. You can't just take on a ton of guards at once, which you can kind of do in some of the latest Assassin's Creeds. So back to basics for Assassin's Creed fans.
Speaking of Californians, if you want something very entertaining and you haven't seen the old school, I guess, depends on who you are, old school SNL bit Californians, that's a funny bit. Go watch the Californians compilation on YouTube. It's pretty funny.
Nice. Sweet. Well, Do you have any takeaways for the episode?
All right. For my long goodbye, what are my takeaways? Well, don't get sick.
Yeah, that's a
Wash
good
your
one.
hands, don't lick doorknobs, that kind of thing. But, TypeScript related, I think things that are getting interesting is looking at spaces where type safety can help you. One, like two places that I think are underrated is config. Like we were talked about, using as const and satisfies for, type safe config. And then there's also like tools like confkit and also FormData, type safe FormData, because that's a huge deal. Like having type safe inputs can help you a lot, especially when your users are malicious.
Yes. I mean, one of the first things that I typically do with a Node.js app is add like a .env file, right? Because that's kind of the typical way. And then, so that's not strongly typed at all. That's not type safe at all. But if I adopted something like confkit, I could do everything inside of a TypeScript module and then import it and use it. And it can read it from, what that actually reminds me of? ASP.NET Core, you can, with C#, you can define all of your config in a type-safe way and load it from environment, files, secret store. Like you can basically do the same kind of layering approach. So this feels like pretty much exactly the same thing, but for full-stack TypeScript apps, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And in general, you want to avoid putting secrets in environment variables if you can have them in a more secure location.
Yes.
So that they're not just like sitting in the clear in your process. They need to be decrypted to be read.
That's right. Yeah, because it's an attack vector. Like if not only can people read in environment variables if they have access, if they can run code when whatever environment those are exposed in, but you can also update them and change them at runtime.
Yeah, there's plenty of supply chain attack vectors here where an npm package is just scooping up environment variables and shooting them back to a, data collection server.
Yeah. So I agree. I think we're starting to see more of like more niche like type safe things, so that more stuff is becoming type safe, which is really nice.
Yeah, I love that for us. Like type safety all the way down. Like certainly type safety for your program logic, but type safety for your configuration and your form data. That's just huge.
Yeah. I'm also really liking the TSGo is evolving at a really fast pace, it feels like. I know you mentioned last time that you feel like most of the stuff is in the LSP that like you would use day to day. And now we're starting to see more of like the other features. Like, I mean, I'd sort of have used the JSDoc stuff, but that is really important because there are still shops that have like a JavaScript app, but they're using types in JSDoc. So having that support now means that they can go and adopt TSGo. And then the build watch mode is also really cool for really big projects like monorepos and stuff. Yeah.
Very nice.
All right. Well, should we say goodbye?
I think we should say goodbye.
All right. Goodbye. We'll see you later. Thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at comronicus.com, and Eric is at ericonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.